Good evening, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of the trustees and our CEO, Kyle Hibble, welcome to Penrose House and our Forum for Attainable Housing in the Pikes Peak Region. I'd first like to recognize the Forum for Civic Advancement team who helped coordinate this event, fellow director Noelle Payment and intern Peyton Crosby, as well as the fellows, interns, facilities, and events staff supporting the event. Please raise your hand. Lastly, we have a number of elected officials present. Thank you first for your public service. Please raise your hand so you can be acknowledged as well. Pomar was established in 1937 to enhance, encourage, and promote the current and future well-being of the people of Colorado through its grant-making. Today, Pomar operates or supports 14 leadership development and community engagement programs and 3 historic properties to create a multiplying effect. Building leadership knowledge and engaging the community on critical civil issues are part of championing and supporting the sector beyond grant-making alone. Pomar's Forum for Civic Advancement, started in 2002, is one of these programs and convenes individuals interested in the civic health of the Pikes Peak region. Through lectures, panels, candidate debates, and seminars, the program provides public-minded citizens, like all of you here today, opportunities to convene, learn, and dialogue about important community issues, and to engage with current and aspiring political and civic leaders. Tonight, you will hear from experts addressing housing in Colorado Springs. These panelists are working toward community solutions across a range of sectors. After the panel, we'll have a reception so that you can continue the conversation with each other. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jonna Reeder-Kleymeier, President and CEO of the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC. Jonna took over as President and CEO of Southern Colorado's largest chamber and economic development corporation in 2022. Economic development and housing go hand in hand. One cannot thrive without the other. Jonna's extensive experience in leading economic development initiatives makes her an ideal moderator for today's event on attainable housing. Throughout her career, she's been a passionate advocate for creating sustainable and inclusive communities. Her leadership has been instrumental in driving economic growth, attracting new businesses, and fostering a vibrant business community. Her deep understanding of the intersection between economic development and housing attainability allows her to bring valuable insight and perspective to this critical discussion. We are pleased to have her guide today's conversation on how we arrived at the current state of housing and where we can go in the future. Please give a warm welcome to Jonna Reeder-Kleymeier.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this evening. This was a test. You all get the gold star because it's Friday night and you're here to talk about housing. We're either very committed to our community or we're not very fun. I'm not sure, but I'm here with you, so this says a lot. So thank you to our panel, and thank you so much for Noelle with your leadership and putting this together, and Stella, always. We're appreciative of your representation of Pomar, so thank you both. Let's dive in. How about first we just introduce ourselves, the organization you're with, and maybe just a sentence about what that means, who you are. Why don't we start with Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Sunderland. I'm the Acting Chief Housing Officer for the City of Colorado Springs, and I oversee our Housing and Community Vitality Department, which oversees homelessness and housing policy.
Thank you, Katie. Thomas?
I'm Thomas Garmong. I'm the president of Oakwood Homes here in Colorado Springs and also the current 2024 president of the Housing and Building Association of Colorado Springs.
Excellent. Thank you. Darcy?
My name is Darcy Nicklausson, founder and president of DHN Development. I started with building 2 multifamily properties in downtown Colorado Springs, and now my company is focused on building primarily for the middle income housing, and we have 2 projects under construction in lease-up in southeast Colorado Springs.
Excellent. Darcy, I'm going to ask you just to bring that microphone a little closer to you. Thank you, ma'am. And Jill?
Thank you, Jonna. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Gabler, and I am the Executive Director of Pikes Peak Housing Network. The network works to support the accessibility and affordability of housing in the Pikes Peak region, and I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you interesting people who focus on housing on Friday night. So it's really exciting.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. You know, as we get started, when we were asked to do this panel, one of the things I thought, and maybe everyone in the audience, you're experts and I'm just not, but one of the things I often hear is people use the words affordable and attainable interchangeably. And that, in my opinion, that's not the case. That's not correct in doing so. It's two different things. So I want to be sure that we start with just level setting, because tonight's about attainable housing. So I want you to gut check me here. I'm asking for correction, which does not happen a lot. So my understanding of attainable housing is housing that's available for those that are at 80% of the average median income in a county. And in El Paso County, that's about $63,000. And that people aren't using more than 30% of their income on housing. And then affordable would be all about maybe some subsidy would be in the housing. Is that right, or correct me, please?
Yeah, I think that you're pretty much dead on. So we typically see 80 to 100% for attainable, and then affordable, we call it capital A affordable housing. If you didn't grab one of these, you should grab one of these. It's in somewhere in here. There's a big stack.
It's your
Over
second
there.
test. We'll find these. Okay.
Where we talk about capital A affordable housing, which, correct, there is some type of government subsidy in there where we, like the government or local government is saying, we will exchange a low interest loan for you to keep rents at a certain level for some type of deed restriction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe it was just me, but I wanted to be sure that we knew where we're focusing tonight, which is in obtainable. So let's get into some questions. I want to start with, how did we get here? When we, if we're going to try to fix a problem, what got us here? So let's start with, the current state of obtainable housing in Colorado Springs and El Paso County, and how's it evolved over recent years? Katie, why don't you start with that?
Okay, yes. So again, I'm going to reference this chart because this is an analysis that our department does every year. We take a look at the PUMS data, which is a micro data set from the census. So instead of looking at census data every 10 years, we can look at this on an annual basis and take a look at the households across El Paso County and which households are cost burdened or extremely cost burdened. So when we look at this, we're looking at what cost burden means is if a household is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, like Jonna referenced. And so for renters, that's your rent plus your utilities. And if for homeowners, that's your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and your utilities, and plus any type of association fees. So that becomes a lot of money. And so what we look at is how many households in each of these income brackets are spending more than 30% of their income and more than 50% of their income. So if we're taking a look at what we call moderate income, so 80 to 120% of the income ranges in our community, which is where attainable housing fits, we see that about 34% of our households are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. What this is doing for our households is there's less money there for transportation, medical, healthy food. There's a monetary share of burden that we're seeing.
Bless you. Jill, what would you add to that? I mean, the current state and how it's evolved. Do you have thoughts on that to add, plus Katie's?
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. I'll give you a little data and kind of talk about how we got to this place. We like to say that back in 2007-08 is when we had the recession, and that's really when we stopped building the number of houses that we need to accommodate our growing population here in the Pikes Peak region. And so the data I have is, according to the Common Sense Institute, we need about 6,000 to 8,000 homes built every year to ensure that we have enough housing for all the people in our community to be able to afford the type of housing that they can afford. And there is a certain part of that, which Katie just mentioned, that folks can only afford attainable housing. So we need to be building enough of that type of housing for our community. Last year, according to the Regional Building Department, we only built 2,665 single-family permits. So when you need 6,000 to 8,000 each year, we really just aren't keeping up. And that was the fewest homes built since 2014. So because of interest rates, because folks aren't buying houses right now because they can't afford them, we're not building. So far, though, in 2024, it is looking better. We've already built over 1,500 homes here in the Pikes Peak region, so we can be hopeful. Additionally, We have 757,000 people living in El Paso County, and 285,000 of these folks, so quite a few of them, are people who can only afford attainable housing. So that's a huge amount of people in our community. And over the last 10 years, housing costs have risen over 100%, where our incomes have only risen about 36%. So as you can understand, the cost of housing is not meeting up with our incomes in our community. And lastly, as we're talking about just the climate, the landscape of the community we have right now, and why it's so hard for us to build the type of housing that our community needs, if you've been reading the paper, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that there is a much larger opposition to the building of attainable housing in our community. Our community really supports the building of single-family homes. 80% of our community is single-family zoned in an R1 zone. And so it's hard for us to build these types of housing, because anytime we build apartments, we try to build condos, we try to build brownstones, people oppose it. And so it's really important for our community to understand this need of what we're talking about tonight, so that we can together and collectively support these kind of projects, so that our elected leaders have that backup to approve these kinds of projects for our community, because many are coming forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Thomas, help educate us. What are the contributing factors to affordable, to available housing in the Colorado Springs region?
Sure. So it's really as simple as three things, right? It is the cost of the home, the cost to construct the home itself, all of the materials, lumber, labor that goes into it, the cost of the land. I'm all considering that the cost of the home. And then what you're seeing right now is interest rates, right? So interest rates have gone from 4% to 7% today. Just for some quick math, I did this earlier today. A $450,000 home, which is about what the median price of a home is in Colorado Springs right now, just assuming a standard loan, 5% down, 30-year term, 740 credit score, conventional loan, at a 4% interest rate, that would have been $2,041 a month. At a 7% interest rate, that's $2,844 a month. So an $800 increase for the exact same home, just based on the interest rate changes. So we've got the cost of the home, we've got the interest rates, and then you have all of the utilities, all of your taxes, all of your property taxes, that in my mind are the three big factors that make affordability a challenge for us today.
So a little off script, would you say some of the mandates from the state have also affected that cost, or even from local government?
Yeah, of course, and we can talk about the components of the cost of the home later on. I believe we're going to touch on that a little bit, but I'm sure you guys have all seen out in the world that everything is getting more expensive, right? The cost of food, the cost of gas, et cetera, has all gone up significantly. It's no different for the price of a home. Lumber is more expensive. The labor to go into that home is more expensive. The lighting fixtures, the countertops, the cabinets, the flooring, all of that has increased with inflation, the same that you guys have seen in your day-to-day life. So all of those components are going up. In addition to that, the fees from any various department that we have, whether it's water, schools, they're all increasing at the same rates. So there's really no good story to tell on the cost of the home. Every single component of it, to include the fee structures, are all increasing. And it's all contributing to this challenge that we have with making the home affordable.
So Darcy, I know in 2022, we saw legislation at the state level about the importance of making homes solar panel ready and EV plug-in ready, and all this sounds really good until it can add $12,000 to $20,000 onto the cost of a home. And when you're just getting by to be able to buy a home, that's a lot of money to add on. What would you say contributes to these costs and adding where we just can't, the affordability, it's not necessarily there?
Yeah, so we're seeing the same thing on the rental side. It's the additional fees. We're now required to put in EV charging stations. So there's an additional fee. Sounds great, but it costs more. So every time something costs more, it's a pretty simple equation, just like when you're buying a house. If you want to buy a house and you add those solar panels on, or you add something else, the costs went up, right? So you're going to have a higher income to be able to pay for that mortgage, or the bank's not going to give you a loan. It's the same thing in our case with apartment buildings. We have a certain cost to build. If you add on another cost, I have to have more income to cover that cost for the loan that the lender is giving me. So every time we add something on, where does my income come from? It's rent. I have to increase rents. Otherwise, I can't go and pay the bills just to cover the requirements from the lender. Now you add in an interest rate, which I originally penciled in at 4%. Now I have to get into the next phase of the project at 8.5. Well, that's my construction loan. I'm really hoping for 6.75 right now. And I've spent hours negotiating with lenders today just to build. When we started 2 of our projects, Mosaica and Kaleidos in Southeast Colorado Springs, the goal was to build for middle income housing. 100% the goal. Our investors are with us on this. They're local investors. They care about Colorado Springs. They own businesses here. They see their employees having a hard time being able to just afford housing. So they're like, hey, we're in. Let's figure out what we can do, even just on the private side of things. And we weren't necessarily going after public funding. Actually, there was no public funding when we started these projects in 2020, 2022. So we said, okay, business plan, we're going to set rents where we have to cover our operating costs, to cover our debt, make our debt coverage, and cover a set return to our investors, right? And borrowing money from them, I got to give them something back. You probably wouldn't give me money for free. If you do, let's talk. But it doesn't usually work that way. So that's our business plan for 2 of our projects. And we're now having to go back to the state as we go into what we call our permanent financing and ask for help from the Colorado Housing Authority to give us a mezzanine loan to make these numbers work. That's how hard it is with interest rate changes, and still try to do as much good as we can for our renters. And our rents are landing between 80 and 100% of area median income with the best that we can. Does that help
Thanks,
answer?
that's very
Yeah,
helpful. Yeah, that's
I
helpful.
can add one on that too. if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
please, Thomas.
So there's a new electrical code that is being adopted, which is the IECC code. That code, while in a microcosm, you want the house to be more efficient, more energy efficient, that's great. But in some cases, that can add $31,000 of cost to the home, which, I mean, if you look at all of these decisions individually, yeah, that's a great decision. Let's make the homes more efficient. It adds cost, and it all contributes to this affordability challenge that we're in.
So I think you all have really helped us define how we got here, what some of the factors that are contributing. Let's talk about what's being done. Katie, how does the lack of attainable housing affect different segments of our community?
Like I mentioned earlier, this affects people at the household level. You've got less money to put towards your retirement, less money to be spending on medical costs, less money to be spending on your transportation. This really limits household mobility and where you can move around in your educational attainment, et cetera. The other place that we're seeing this is that employers are looking to Colorado Springs and trying to match up their wages for the folks that they're going to be employing in our community with our housing stock that's available, and we're seeing a mismatch here. And this is causing some problems. We see that we're getting docked on these scorecards for employers, and we really want to make sure that we're providing housing for our workforce for the attainable levels.
Given that that's my day job, I would completely agree with and I did not pay her to say that, but if we want good paying jobs, they have to be able to live here. Thomas, would you add anything on the piece with different segments of our community and how
Sure.
it's affecting them?
So I think Joe mentioned that our population today is about 750,000 in El Paso County. If you look at the projections, we're supposed to be over 1 million households by 2049, I believe. So when you look at the demographics of what's driving that growth, it is really every single segment of population. If you look at all of the age ranges bracketed in 10-year brackets, they're all increasing over those next few years. So I think in general, what a lot of builders are doing is they're trying to tackle or at least Oakwood in particular, is trying to tackle that affordability challenge because we see the growth, we see how difficult it is to buy those more expensive homes. So what we have done is tried to position product. We've tried to create houses that are at a lower price point because we feel that's where all of the demand or all the buyers are going to be. So when you talk about innovation of how do you do that, right? If you look at innovation in the home building construction area, really since the 1940s and 1950s, there's only been one drastic innovative change. Does anyone know what it is? It's the pneumatic nail gun. That really is only the big piece of innovation that we've had. But that's changing rapidly. What you're seeing is you're starting to see builders that are starting to really try and innovate from a product standpoint. They're trying to build more of the home in a factory because it's more efficient. You're seeing wall panels that are built in a factory. They're being insulated. Electrical is run. Windows are installed. Siding is installed on this wall before it comes out to the home. Unfortunately, that's not enough. That's just been trying to keep pace with the rising cost of everything. So from a demographic standpoint, from a product standpoint, that's some of what you're going to see in the marketplace is that innovation on product side to eliminate any kind of cost that we can, because a $700,000 home, there's only so many buyers for that home. If we could build a home that was 200 or 250, there could really be a market for that. That's where the demand is, but we just can't reach that price point today.
So Jill, hearing this, what are specific initiatives or policies that have been implemented, are being implemented now, could be implemented at the local, state, or federal levels to try to address the issue? How effective have these initiatives been, and what challenges have they encountered to their implementation?
That's such a big question.
That's a lot.
And I think Katie can probably fill in on this also. I mean, the city has done some great things with its zoning code. Many of you were around when we did Plan COS to really try to figure out how we wanted to grow as a city, and then retool, put the teeth into that, and really guide our land use code. But much of that code is set out for the future of the city as it grows outward. And I think it's really important that we, as a community, also consider how we can take that same retool code that allows some more flexible mixed-use coding, codes that allow different types of residential uses together, some light commercial uses, what I call gentle density, again, the brownstones, types of housing within an R1 zone, bringing those types of housing into the existing part of the city. So allowing them in the infill part of the city is what we need to start doing. I talk a lot about the missing middle housing. We, in our downtown, have a lot of apartments now. We still don't have enough apartments, even though you think we do. And when you leave downtown, we immediately start moving into single-family homes. And again, we need to have that missing middle that you'll see in Chicago, for instance, where you see the 3-story brownstones that have 10 units on a parcel of land that could hold one single-family home, but can then house 10 families. And that's not high density, but it's a middle density that we need to start infilling our city. And so that is what I'd really like to see. We have done some really great things in the last few years, but moving into that would really help our community. At the state level, it was mentioned how many bills have passed that have increased the cost of housing. We had a lot of housing bills this past session, and I mean, when I was on city council, we had maybe a couple a year. We have our state senator here who can attest to that. Housing's become a huge issue, and we probably had 20 to 30 bills this year, most of them saying they would lower the cost of housing. But if you really look into it, they are actually increasing the cost of housing, the rental costs, because they're putting so much more attention and demand onto the landlords that it will ultimately increase the cost of housing. We did have one bill, however. I mean, we had a few bills that were pretty good, but my favorite bill is House Bill 1107, which did pass this year, and that was titled Judicial Review of Land Use Decisions. And that says that when a land use decision is made at the city for a multifamily project, the city council has approved it. Right now, any neighborhood person can appeal that decision to a state entity. And they can still do that. That bill still allows anyone to appeal that decision, but now there's a little teeth into it, because whoever loses that, if the neighbors lose that appeal, they will pay the costs of the city's legal department. So if you have a legitimate case to appeal, then please, I mean, do the best thing on behalf of our city, but those frivolous lawsuits have caused significant delay for our multifamily developers, 8 and 9 month delays that cost increase the costs of their development significantly as they are fighting legal costs, having to reapply for different permits and have you. So I'm really excited about that bill. There's been a couple other bills that were passed that we wish had been more locally voiced, but the ADU bill that requires cities to pass new local zoning code to allow ADUs in the R1 zone. There are a lot of people who don't think accessory dwelling units or grandma cottages, as they say, are effective at providing enough housing for our community. But with 70 to 90,000 single-family homes here in our community, if even 2 to 5% of those homes added a cottage, it could be 3 to 5,000 homes in some very attractive neighborhoods in our community for attainable housing. So there are some really good things happening. And it's just really important that we stay vigilant and we try to promote the positive things.
That's good insight. Thomas, your company is national. What have you seen? Are there things that have been passed that are working, that could be passed?
I think in general, right, it's not rocket science. Anything that can streamline the efficiency of bringing a house to the market, that's all the way from zoning, land development, to the actual construction of the home. Anything that can shorten that amount of time, whether it's efficiencies through approvals, et cetera, anything that can be done to shorten that will be effective at reducing the cost of the home. Supporting as a community increased density so we can bring on new and innovative product like the ADUs, like more modular built homes that are built in a factory will reduce the cost of the home. As far as on a national level, I need all of your kids to go to trade school in addition to college would be great, because labor is a real issue in the field. We as a nation have steered our kids towards college education as the only path to success. I can tell you right now that there's electricians out in the field that have 4 or 5 years of experience that are making $120,000 a year. And so we need more of that labor. We need more kids to go into trades. We need more schools to support having trade programs, vocational programs in their schools. You look at the amount of student debt that folks coming out of college have today, I'm telling you there's a path to success in the trades. And I think we as a nation need to recognize that and embrace that.
Yeah, and putting your HBA hat on, there's a great program, Careers in Construction, that has received national attention that started right here in Colorado Springs.
Absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's a program where we basically allow high school kids to play around in a house, to actually build a house. They'll actually come out of that program with OSHA 10 certifications and start a path to becoming a journeyman electrician or a plumber or any of these categories that we really need in the field. It's very difficult. I mean, you guys would be surprised at how much those folks make just because there's so few of them, right? I have a son. I really want him to go to trade school. I do not want him to go to college because I've seen it firsthand. So,
And those daughters could go too, right?
Yeah.
she's challenging. She's going to go to college.
Okay. We won't get into that. We won't get into that. I know I saw Kevin Walker in the audience, our new interim planning and zoning director. You had to go back to the city just one more time. Thank you for joining us this evening. So I won't put you on the spot since you're brand new, so I'm gonna put Katie on the spot. Are there any proposed zoning changes, laws that could positively impact the attainable housing availability?
I think what we need to focus on here is that, like Jill alluded to, we had a huge overhaul to the land use code recently, and it's been in effect for about a year at this point. And one of the huge wins that came out of that was the inclusion of these residential flex zone districts. What these districts do is provide an option for a mix of housing types. So instead of just having an R1 area, so one single family house per lot, you're able to mix together attached and detached units. So like what Jill was talking about, these 3-story brownstones, having duplexes, small and low density, like apartment type units, so 4, 5, 6-plex units. So this is increasing the density in areas where we've seen more of a lesser density and a lesser housing usage. So I think, honestly, it's been in effect for a year, and I'm not going to put words in Kevin's mouth or our planning department, but the city is always open to hearing feedback from the development community of where do we need to be improving parts of our zoning code to have it be working well for our community and solving the problems that we need to locally. And so as this continues to be utilized by our development community and our residents, that's something that they'll be looking for feedback on, is like where did we miss? Where could we be improving?
Thank you. So I read somewhere, work smart instead of hard. I'm trying. I'm working on that. So, if we can borrow ideas, if we can steal ideas from other communities, best practices, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I would love the question for all of you, what successful partnerships have you seen locally, either in our community that have worked, or maybe in other places that Colorado Springs or El Paso County could adopt? Open to the panel, any one of you.
I've got
Thomas?
one. I can go first. So PPRBD is our regional building department here in Colorado Springs and El Paso County. They have been a great asset to the builders and developers here locally. They're very smart with the way that they adopt plans or new code changes, and they've just been a great partner. I think that they have really the heart of the community is their focus, and how do we provide that affordable housing for them. So the way that they adopt codes, the way that they change to new codes is very smart. They give us a lot of time and a lot of heads up that this is coming, and how we can pick and choose what pieces of it we can implement when. They're just a great partner for most of our builders and developers here. I would say all of them.
I love the efficiency that it's regional. We don't have a different department in every one of our municipalities.
That's a really good point. So you're right. I mean, it is for all of El Paso County. So it makes it very easy for builders and developers that are building in the Springs or in the county or in Fountain or in Manitou, right? It's very simple. Oakwood has a division up in Denver, and they're dealing with City of Aurora, they're dealing with City of Denver, they're dealing with Centennial, right? And each of them are very different. And it makes it hard for a company to really maximize the economies of scale, because this collection of homes is different than this collection of homes. This one's on this code, this one's on that code. So it really makes it more challenging. That is a great resource and a benefit that we have here.
It's a great example. Other examples, Jill?
So we talk a lot about how we can find land to build housing, attainable housing, affordable housing. And what we're starting to see is some collaboration between school districts and nonprofits. And there's a couple out there that are really doing some great things. I serve on the board of We Fortify, and they have a tiny home project in the Mill Street neighborhood, but they are now partnering with School District 2 to build what they call noble villages, and those are duplexes, 40 duplexes out there just for the staff and the teachers of the school district of District 2. And it's affordable housing, not attainable housing. Sorry, I went a little bit off script, but it's an exciting collaboration. We also have a couple of my other favorite ones, which we are now calling YIGBY, Yes in God's Backyard, where we are finding some churches who want to partner with nonprofits. Grescio Housing is currently doing one with Woodman Valley Chapel. I know you have a different name for that project, and I can't remember what it is, but the project will be Shiloh
Mesa.
Thank you. And then, of course, Pastor Ben Anderson has his amazing project down in the southeast with Solid Rock, and we're really excited about that. And do we have an announcement yet about when that might open? No.
We're not going to put Pastor Ben on the
Sorry,
spot.
Pastor Ben. But
He's
that's
a
also
powerful man.
affordable housing. But I am really excited about the potential for the partnerships between our nonprofits, whether it's school districts or churches. And I know the city is working on a GIS map of finding all of these potential infill spaces where we can find great partnerships for those who are wanting to sell land and those who need land, and to provide housing for folks who live nearby, work nearby, so that we are reducing transportation costs on our road and allowing people to have less transportation costs to get to and from work.
Yeah, and you mentioning that, I saw Stu Davis in the audience, and he's talking right now, so he's not even going to hear me compliment him. Because I Love You, I know, has a panel coming up a little later, I think, in the year to talk about these partnerships and how the faith-based community can work with the private sector and find some unique partnerships here. I love it. So kudos to you all and what you're doing. Katie, would you add anything? And Darcy, any other best practices or things you've seen in other places?
Yeah, and honestly, I'm going to talk kind of about an innovative approach here. And I'm going to tout Mayor Yemi and his focus on housing solutions. There's many of you in this audience that were part of both the strategic planning process, the listening tours, and really helped shape how the city is responding to multiple issues that the municipal government covers. And one of those is housing solutions. And Stu was also on that panel, so representing multiple ways, so thank you. His focus on housing solutions is really pushing this conversation forward, and we are becoming a highlight of the state because of that leadership. And a couple of things that have come out of this is really a renewed focus on how can we be providing housing solutions, both innovative construction techniques, so partnering more with careers in construction. How do we work from the city side to incentivize more of these houses being built on the land that's existing? One of the other things I'll say specifically for Attainable Housing, and this is a program that our city and department is getting quite a bit of recognition for, is called our fee rebate program. So in a typical underwriting process, what Darcy was alluding to is you're going through your rents are this much and your income is this much and this is how much we will lend you, et cetera. We do a fee rebate program where we are doing a community underwriting process, so really taking a look at what type of housing are developers bringing to our community, and they're meeting the need of our residents. And so that includes how low are your rents? So are you hitting these attainable rents? Where are you locating this? Are you providing additional accessible units beyond what code requires? How green is the infrastructure and how green are the building components within this development? And we're issuing them a score. And so out of that score, we say, okay, hey developer, you have accrued this massive charges for your building permit, for your infrastructure, for your impact fees, for your development review, and we're going to rebate a portion of that cost directly back into the development, so you can use that for cost overruns, contingencies. We're seeing that as used as sources within performas, and this is a program, honestly, that is we've been giving to other cities, saying like, please rip this off so that we can get more housing, honestly, across our state. So innovative right now as a program go, and I'm really proud to say this, that we are leading the way from a city perspective on how do we incentivize good development within our community.
Great, glad to hear that. I know the mayor was very involved with the construction defects litigation this past session. I'm sure some of you will get into that in a moment. Why don't we go to some questions from the audience? So I'm just going to grab some here. I did not pick them. I'm just going to read them out. So Darcy, why don't we start with you? What policies or incentives can be put in place to encourage the development of universally designed housing that accommodates various disabilities?
So we actually already have that in place as a community within the United States. It's called the Americans with Disability Act of 1990. So incentives are considered the carrot. This is the stick, right? We actually don't get our building permits unless we build to these design standards. So in the apartment world or the for-rent world, we have to provide so many units that we refer to as A-type units, and those are designed for people who might have a disability and are actually in a wheelchair, or mobility impaired, I should say. So the doorways are 3 feet wide. The countertops are lower. The microwave is not up here, it's down here, so things are reachable, accessible. There's more room to move around in the bathrooms and so forth. So if you're building 100 units, it's required by code. You don't get your building permits if you don't build this way. So that is so we have 2 units for every 100 right now. In addition, there's just a certain level, a certain standard that we have to build towards. All of our door handles have to be a certain way for persons with mobility. Buildings will require braille throughout for signage, ramps up instead of steps, and so forth. So it's already there. We've actually been building to it for many, many years now.
Thank you. I know that helped educate me. Here's another question that was submitted prior to tonight by our audience. Thomas, I'll ask you to answer this one. What are the percentages of the total cost of housing for land, subdivision improvements, water and wastewater tap fees, lumber and construction materials, and then they mentioned labor again, and then relative to 20 years ago, what percentage has changed the most?
It's a lot. And it's very difficult to really quantify that. So I'm going to speak
Thomas,
in
do
very...
you have your pro forma with you?
I could pull one out. We could go through it in detail, but I'm going to talk in generalities here. So typically about 20 to 30% of the cost of the home is related to the land. And whether that's you're a builder that is purchasing finished lots or whether you're developing it yourself. And the development side of it is, taking a bare piece of prairie and putting in the streets, the roadways, the curbs, the gutters, the sidewalks, the pipes, the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, all of that. That is part of what I'm calling the cost of the land for that home. So that's typically about 25%, 20 to 30, depending on what your project is, or whether you're purchasing lots or whether you're developing them yourself. A lot of that is also based on where you're buying, right? What's the cost of the land that you're buying? Let's say it's a bare piece of prairie out on the eastern side of town. That's going to be a lot cheaper than something that's on the western side of town up against the mountains. It's going to have a better view. The value of that land is going to be more. So it's really hard to kind of quantify that. It's so individual. When you look at the cost of the home, so that's the lumber, that's the carpet, that's the cabinets, all of the components that go into the home. That's typically 50 to 60% of the cost of the home is going to be what it costs that builder to buy those components and assemble those components. The other parts of the house cost are really going to be the fee structure. That's your building permits, all of your TAP fees, all of your school fees, all of your system development fees, et cetera. That's really going to be jurisdictional dependent, municipality dependent, whether you're in the city or whether you're in the county, but that typically runs anywhere from 5 to 20%, again, depending on where your home is located. In addition to that, there's other fees with warranties where we have to hold back money to make sure that we can warranty any issues with the home, et cetera. So those are just some very broad generalities with the cost of the home itself. And of course, that doesn't include anything with what it costs to run that home building company. So all of your sales folks, your marketing folks, your builders, right? I'm just talking about purely the cost that goes into that home itself.
So let's get a little spicy. I didn't write it, but I like it. Missing middle housing. How can the city and county help in building condos and townhomes when architects and engineers have a 90% chance of being sued? I don't know if 90% is the right percentage, but I know that you're likely to get sued. Maybe we need a little explanation of why people would get sued, and I'll open that up to the panel.
Do you want me to do that?
Go for it. I'll jump in.
So I believe Colorado is a fairly unique state. There might be a couple others, I'm assuming California, where it's very easy to sue the developer of condos. And so condos are connected properties, and when there is a construction defect in said condo, there is this ability to have a class action lawsuit over all the units. And trial lawyers have found this a very lucrative way to make money. And so over the past couple of years, there's been several attempts to modify our current state statutes around this code to allow the developers what they would call a right to repair, to work directly with the homeowner to repair the construction defect before they create some sort of class action lawsuit. This past year, Jonna mentioned a specific bill. It was SB 106, I believe, Senate Bill 106, that would have allowed that right to repair, among other things. And that bill was soundly defeated. It did get through the Senate, I believe. Am I
It did.
right?
That's correct.
So thank you.
Sorry,
But,
I'm not on the panel, but I was there. It did get through the Senate.
And the chamber did send up a huge bus of folks. I did go. Many of us testified that night. We worked really hard to get that bill passed. It failed. I believe that bill will try to come back, something similar in this next legislative session. It's important for us to do that because, as was mentioned in the comment, that condos are often the first entry-level type of home ownership product for our community members. It is the cheapest. I was just talking to my son about it today, about a condo, and then he wouldn't have to worry about mowing any lawn. So, I mean, for young people to have that first option of home ownership and start creating that generational wealth is really important. It's also really important for our seniors who live in maybe bigger homes and want to downsize into a smaller home, still an owned product, and maybe stay within close to their current neighborhood. But again, as I mentioned earlier, 80% of our community is zoned single family. So you won't have a lot of those condo opportunities in many of our neighborhoods. So seniors are forced to move to other areas of the city in which they maybe don't want to live. So this is a huge issue for our community to be trying to build more condos because we're not building them now. The developers can't get insurance, and it's just too expensive to build that type of housing product.
And that's anywhere across the state.
That is
That's
anywhere,
in
not
our-
just Colorado Springs. And actually, we did pass a local ordinance on that issue a few years ago, trying to send a message, and it didn't work.
So one of the questions was, what went well in this legislative session? What do you look that we will concentrate on next year? I would assume that we'll be concentrating on trying to go after fixing construction defects and having a right to remedy in next session.
Yes.
Anything else you all would hit that you think we'll try to do next session?
I can add to that
Please.
this legislative session, the mayor was very vocal about us supporting the construction defect law around condo construction because of exactly everything that Jill said. This is the first step for home ownership within our community, and what we're seeing, as Thomas alluded to, a median priced home between $450,000 to $490,000. Just the principal and interest is going to end you up at $3,000. The average family, household of four in our community, is making about $100,000 and can afford housing payments of $2,600 a month. So already with just your principal and interest, you are sending yourself over the cost burden limit. So this condo product it would be huge for our community. So if this comes up again in the legislative session, the city will be vocally behind pushing something like that forward as part of the housing solutions.
Well, first-time home buyers, this is a great entry-level product. Let us not forget our 5 military installations here and those families that need to get into housing on a fixed income themselves. So,
Yeah, let me add a
please.
point on condos too. So I'll tell you my story. The first home I ever purchased was a condo. Why? Because it's all I could afford at the time. Why is a condo more efficient and cheaper than a traditional single-family home? Well, if you look at the footprint that condo is sitting on, it's typically going to be relatively small compared to traditional. Let's say you have 10 units, right? 10 units on a traditional single-family home site is going to be a lot more land, a lot more development. So you can have the higher density by having a condo. The construction of that condo is much more efficient because you're typically going vertical and you're building 10 units at one time versus 10 individual homes. So the cost of that condo is going to inherently be cheaper than a traditional single-family home. And the more that we have here, the better it's going to be for affordability.
Thank you, panel. Darcy, jump in anytime. Okay, I got a good one. Some local groups cite data that compare our population and housing rates to Denver, saying that we are already, in quotations, overbuilt. How do you respond to the idea that Colorado Springs needs no more housing development? Open to the panel?
I'll start that one if you want.
Please.
Well, I already mentioned the disparity between incomes and the cost of housing. So right away, we have many more people who can't afford a higher priced home, and we need to be building more attainable types of housing, and that's what we're not doing. When it comes to rents, I mean, that's where we typically consider folks looking for attainable housing in rental housing, and we have seen a lot of development. We have seen a ton of development downtown, and we're seeing a lot of development on the outskirts of our community. Before this event, I did look at some recent data around vacancy rates and our rental rates to see if things are actually showing a decrease, that we're having higher vacancy rates. In downtown, we are having a little higher vacancy rate. It's about 9.5%, but that is typically because we're building so much downtown, and every time they bring a new property on for a little while, it's at 100% vacant, right? So every month I notice the vacancy rates in downtown are beginning to go down, and the price of housing, rental housing in downtown, is higher than anywhere else in the city. So many people want to live in our downtown, and We do have some several thousand units in the pipeline, but because of interest rates, it will be slowing down. It already is slowing down, and that actually is concerning to me. And again, it's the developers who do the market analysis, and they best understand what is needed in our community, and they're taking the risk, and they have the most to lose. A couple other data points. For the entire city, the average vacancy rate is about 7.2%, which is not very high. And over the past year, our average rents throughout the city have decreased about $10 a month. So yeah, it's starting to go down. I wouldn't suggest in any way that says that we have a glut. It says that what we're doing is starting to work, that rents are beginning to stabilize, and that's what we want. We need our rents to actually go down so more of our community members can find housing they can afford. And lastly, just because I wanted to have one more data point, I looked at the rents on the west side. The west side is where we're trying to build more affordable housing that has the highest contentious opposition. And actually, the rents on the west side in the last year over year, have increased $40 a month. And as I mentioned, the entire city has a vacancy rate of about 7.2. The vacancy rate on the west side is 5.25%. So rents are higher there because there's not enough housing, which is why the vacancy rate is so low. A lot of people want to live on our west side, and that's because there's a lot of primary employers on the west side. People want to live closer to where they work to keep their transportation costs low, and it's important for us to be focusing on that side of town for attainable housing.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so recently the Common Sense Institute did a report for our community, for Colorado Springs specifically, and talked about the deficit of units that we currently have. And they estimate that we have a deficit currently of 16,000 to 27,000 housing units, which does not take into account the increase in our population, which annually they're projecting about 7,200 new residents per year in Colorado Springs. So what that's telling us is that we don't have enough housing for the current residents who are living in our city. And so where are they living? They're doubling up with friends, family, et cetera. And so what they're doing is we're seeing these new multifamily products come online that are on a lower price point than the single family products. And we're seeing these higher absorption rates. There's been multiple studies done that, we are one of the jurisdictions that is building the most multifamily housing right now. I think we're actually second to Huntsville, Alabama, which...
Well, we can only be second to
Interesting.
them in that.
Yeah.
Nothing else, my friend. Just saying. Okay.
But what we're seeing, and this is really encouraging and is supporting what Jill is saying, is that we're seeing these high absorption rates. This means that we're seeing these units being rented. So as they're coming online, people are slowly trickling out of these doubled up situations and into these different housing units.
This is me. I'm praying my 22-year-old gets out of my basement. So someone build something, please, please. And in all seriousness, our young people have to have housing if we want them to be able to fill the jobs of the future here and not in Huntsville. So yeah. There was with that. So with increasing regulatory oversight at the state level, driving up development costs, what can be done locally to counteract state level regulation?
Can you repeat that?
Anyone? No one? Okay. With increasing regulatory oversight at the state level, driving up development costs, Thomas gave quite a few different examples. What can be done locally to counteract state level regulation? Or can we?
I think utilities is our largest area to potentially reduce regulation. We have a municipally owned utility. We are very fortunate. It's the largest municipally owned utility in the state of Colorado. And of course, our city council members are the board of directors for that utility, for service utility, water, wastewater, electric, and gas. And there are a ton of regulations being put on us from the state level. And a lot of that is pushing us into renewables when renewables are still too expensive, when we don't have the storage capacity to hold all of those renewables. And at our board, we need to be telling our board, do what you can to keep costs low, try to balance our need for renewables and I'm sorry, carbon types of energy production. And I mean, talk to the folks at the state, elect people who support all types of energy and are focusing on keeping our costs low, because as Katie said, the cost of housing includes your utility costs. And there was an article on the front page of the paper today about utilities in the next year, and we're expecting at least a 10% increase. And in 1 year, that's a lot. And a lot of that is being put on us from the state regulations. And we can't necessarily control that, but we do have voices on who we elect and how we promote our voices through our utility board. So there is that potential.
I would second
Yeah,
that
anything
with
else?
Jill. It's not just on development costs. What we're seeing in the apartment industry, there was a lot of bills that went through this last couple of years regarding apartments and regulation. And I honestly believe that a lot of it came from a place of wanting to help people. But your legislators need to understand, and they need to they need to look at all sides of the equation, right? So I'm going to give an example here. There was a recent bill that restricted apartment complexes from charging certain types of fees, and felt that these fees were extraordinary. They're not necessary. And that may be true, that we need to be in the apartment industry accountable for what fees we're charging and why. I don't disagree with that. I think we need to be honest with people. And most of apartment complexes actually are. And some may have been extraordinary and not necessary. They could do it in a tight market because of a short amount. I mean, there was a short amount of supply, and they could do it based on a capitalistic market. However, in restricting that fee, and at the risk of me looking like the bad developer and the bad landlord, what happened is it said, okay, you can no longer charge this one-time upfront fee that helps to cover our upfront leasing costs, right? There's just additional costs when somebody comes in and we're leasing and we're trying to cover that cost. So I can't cover that cost anymore. I still need the revenue. I can't not have that revenue. It factors in. So what happened? I had to increase my rents by $20 across the board for everybody. I had to put it in rents. That actually will cost the renters more over their lifetime with me than it will be for that one-time upfront cost. This happens when the people making the rules don't fully understand the business, and I just want them to talk to us about how the business works, because most of us actually really do care about our residents, and we care deeply. It's not what I wanted to do, but I'm up against bills that I have to pay. So it's not just in the development fees, it's in other things on how we're regulated. So be vocal, vote, but make sure that who you're putting in place, and talk to them, that they're looking at all sides. I went and talked to one of our legislators, and they're like, well, I talked to a couple apartment owners. And like, you didn't talk to me. I'm right here. I've talked to you about this stuff. Why not come and talk to me? I will show you all of the data, and we can talk it through and see what we can do best. And I think most of us will.
Well, so with that, Darcy, would a cost cap on the cost of homes or apartments be effective to keep the crazy increase in prices down? Is that possible? So rent fixing.
Rent control.
No.
Sorry, rent control. Sorry.
It
See, no
right.
poker face.
It
Please.
just means, and I'm on the new construction side, right? I don't do rehabs and so forth, and we do maintain our own properties. But if you cap it, I don't have enough revenue to cover the debt payments. It's as simple as that. It's just like you limited your income, can't pay for any more. I can't build it because the guy with the hammer who needs a decent living as well had a labor, he needs a good wage. We all want that person or she to live in a good home, right? Well, their wages need to go up. So my construction costs went up. So I need more money from equity or lenders. I have to cover a higher bill. I need more rent. It just is this really harsh cycle that we keep creating here. So if you put a rent cap on it, I just won't build it. It's just not possible to do it.
So, Thomas, have you seen where cost fixing or rent controls have worked in other cities, or?
No, I don't think that's ever worked anywhere, and it feels very un-American to me. So if you look at the continuum of housing, right? So we talked about me buying my first house was a condo, right? I had kids, my family grew, moved into a bigger house, right? Eventually my kids are going to move out, and hopefully I'm going to move to a smaller house. Hopefully back to a condo would be great. So all housing is good housing because it provides for the whole continuum, right? You're always going to have new folks that are coming into the market. You're going to have people that are getting married, starting families. You're going to have people that are getting divorced. You're going to have people that are relocating to our community for jobs, right? You're going to have people that are downsizing as they move into retirement. I think limiting that would be so impossible to have that happen. I can't believe that anyone would really think or see success in that of limiting opportunity or homes for folks that need them.
I think it's interesting. Would you want the value of your house to be limited? So you can no longer sell it at the highest price that you could?
Interesting thought.
Careful before you do that to others.
So, Katie, I'll ask this one of you. Would accessible dwelling units be considered as middle-income housing option? And why are ADUs so hard to get approved in Colorado Springs?
So, accessory dwelling unit. So, as Jill mentioned, recently there's legislation that came down that said single-family zoned lots will now permit accessory dwelling units. Currently, our zoning code permits them in certain zone districts throughout the city. And that was a response based on community feedback. And I'll give a plug for a public process here as the public servant at the table. As when we're talking to your elected officials, like reminder that the mayor is an elected official and that we are doing tons of public surveying and public process to understand the sentiment of the community so that we can accurately convey that to elected bodies. And then I lost the question. Why are they so hard? Well,
Why are they so hard to get approved?
So,
I'm reading the question.
So
Yeah.
it's because they were currently allowed in certain zone districts. Now, because of that state legislation, we'll be having to take a look at the new, at our zoning code and to modify our regulations to abide by that new state rule.
I think change is hard. And when change is going to happen right next to you, and the ADUs are in established neighborhoods, that's a tough pill for everybody to swallow because we're always scared of the change and we're fearful of what might come. We're fearful of traffic. We can make up all these things, of these horrendous things that are going to happen. We don't know if it's true or not, but that ADU represents change, and that's scary. So I think that's hard to do. It's hard to do infill development for that reason.
I think on the new construction side, though, you're going to see that kind of innovation going forward, right? You're going to see communities that are built from the get-go with optional ADUs associated with it. And I will tell you, there's builders in town that are building those homes today. And I know for a fact that there are people that are buying that house with an ADU, and they are living in the ADU, and they are renting out the big house because that's what works for their budget. That's what they can afford. I think that's a great opportunity, a great idea, or a great showcase of how builders are adapting and trying to hit an affordable price point. You're going to see more of that in this community. Hopefully, you're going to see different ideas, different product to hopefully fit this need of affordable housing.
I think also as builders are responding to both the need for different ways for financial models to work for specific households, but they're also responding to the changing household dynamic where we're talking about you have parents living with, I mean, personally, I would love for my parents to live with me so that I could have childcare because that's a whole nother issue.
Will you take my son? He'd be
child
great with
yes.
kids. Okay.
Like, how do I get some built-in childcare for anyone? So there's all of these pressures and factors in our community that require our housing market to be elastic and to be adaptable to the changing needs of our community. And what we are seeing is that our developers are responding to that. And that's it's a huge positive for us.
So
All right, Jill.
I'll just
Nope,
add
you can't because
one.
we've got another one for you.
No, I have one more. So it was my council that passed the first ordinance around accessory dwelling units. And I love what Katie's saying, the flexibility and adapting. I think the council at the time, we knew we were coming in with a new type of product. And we knew that this was an incremental change to our existing housing code, and change is hard. And the hope was that as a few are brought on, people would realize that that change really wasn't as difficult as they expected it would be, and that then future councils would modify that code to make it more adaptable to the existing code. So, I mean, as the land use body, the council, I think, will adapt to that.
So for those of you that may not know, Jill was a former city council person. So this one's for you, Jill. We're not talking about cars. Most manufactured I think manufactured housing is what they make. Most manufactured housing in infield is opposed based on traffic and parking. Are there policies, ideas, or plans that can balance needs for parking with creating more local pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods?
You could have added the word bikes, and then it would have been a perfect question.
I was going to say, I know you're big in transportation too, so they said it was for you. I didn't pick you.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think the city, and well, again, there was a state bill that was passed this year that also has some transit-oriented development components to it, so we will be required to move in that direction. But currently, our city also has, I think, proactively modified how many parking spaces we must include in multifamily homes so that it keeps that cost lower, and Katie could be more specific about that. But I think as attainable housing, we have to be looking at parking spaces. Do we really need all the parking spaces that our codes require? Because those parking spaces cost a lot of money. I mean, $8,000 to $10,000 for parking spaces, and those funds can be used to produce another housing unit. And so we have to balance the cost of parking for housing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the more that we think about our city and start to build housing, all types of housing in all areas of our city, then people can choose to live wherever they want. And most likely, those people are going to choose to live closer to where they work. So they are going to reduce their own transportation costs. They are going to reduce overall congestion on our roads. And we won't have this need to continue to build roads, to maintain our roads as much, because people are using the roads less. Also, as we create more density in our existing city, we finally create enough folks in that city to have a robust transit system. We really struggle with our transit system because we don't have enough people in a dense enough area to make it viable for most people. And by viable, people need to know that a bus is coming within about 15 minutes. So we have that in the center part of the town, but there are a lot of folks who don't even want our transit system going by their house. So we have to change people's views on transit, on our roads, and we have to be building all types of housing anywhere. And I'm going to say one more thing because my husband likely wants me to talk about it, and that is that the more we build inside our city, not on the outskirts, the cheaper it is for us to maintain our infrastructure. Whenever we build another housing project on the edge of the city, we have to build new roads, we have to build new infrastructure, and then we have to maintain that infrastructure. If we can build more infill, you're using existing roads, existing infrastructure, and you get the added bonus of adding more taxpayers in that existing area who are paying for those roads and that infrastructure. So the more density and more infill that we produce in the city, all of those things create a simpler road system and create more viability for transit and bike lanes.
So you can see why condos are important.
Condos are very important. There's a deer.
Oh, cue the deer. We are at El Pomar. It's always beautiful. So this one is a little bit more of a statement, but I think it's important to put out there. When addressing any and all housing issues, why is accessible not included in every statement? By addressing the word accessible along with attainable, we would be much more inclusive. Would you agree with that?
I think
Katie?
I'm assuming that they're talking about accessibility from a design perspective.
Well, I would say probably how we were, I don't know. I didn't write the question. I shouldn't, I'm not sure.
Yes, and like this is the direction that we're moving. As I was talking about our fee rebate program earlier, one of those places that we score these new multifamily developments on is how are you incorporating universal design within your development. And one of the architects that helped me develop this guidelines, Mark Tremmel, is in the audience, and his firm is already using universal design principles within housing development. Now, universal design principles are these 7 principles that are outside of the code that Darcy talked about, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It really is focusing on how do we make all of these units usable for everyone, regardless of your age. It's like an 8 to 80 type of situation. Okay, so if this works for somebody who is 8 years old, is it also going to work for somebody who's 80? Are the door handles what you need? Do you have showers that you can roll into? Are your lights able to be dimmed? So if you have a visual impairment, you're able to adjust that based on what you need. So universal design is something that we are taking into consideration, especially in the affordable and attainable housing space from the city side, and trying to incentivize that through our fee rebate program.
So one more for you. Is there a land use system in place for public-private partnerships to build homes on private land? What city department can offer direction on this?
To help build homes on private land?
Yeah, a land use system in place for public-private partnerships. So public.
yes,
So if you're going to
yes.
be involved and it's a private land,
Yes.
are there things in place to do so? And where do they go? Who do they
Yeah.
talk to about that?
You talk to me.
That's you?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
well,
me.
there you go.
I was like, did I hear that right? That's me. Yeah, I mean, Jill mentioned this earlier, but some of the partnerships that are happening with our faith-based community in our city are incredible. We have a very robust faith community that own a lot of land and a lot of excess land and developable land in our community. And so partnering with them and having these private-public partnerships, including some of our funds or our rebate program into the development is how we're able to do those partnerships. I meet with developers and interested developers weekly, almost daily, talking about what the city can do to be a partner in housing development. So
Okay.
yes, if you know anybody, send them my way.
So see you. And I
See
assume
me.
they can get all your information online.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. This is a good one. What has been the most harmful state bill recently passed? What would you change? Should I go to the senator for that one? As I say, woo, okay. Any thoughts on that? For me, it would be more what didn't pass, but thoughts?
Yeah,
The one that just passed, but the governor vetoed. I know I was thankful.
yeah. I think you're right. I think it's the ones that didn't pass, which are the most hurtful or detrimental to providing affordable housing, I'd say.
Okay, right. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
So many.
People mean well, right? To Darcy's
Yeah.
point, they mean well,
And
but
that's
maybe
exactly
don't
right.
understand the long-term impacts.
A lot of these legislators think they're helping renters, but in the long term, they're just raising the cost of rent. And there were many bills that passed this year that will do just that, unfortunately.
There's also, there was a bill that passed, so we talked earlier about how typically your total housing cost should be 30% of your income, and this is the way it's been for years that things have been calculated and looked at. And recently the legislators changed it so that in evaluating, a resident comes in and we have to make sure that we have the right as an owner to make sure that they have enough income that they can pay the rent, right? So we check, we verify income and so forth. Well, they changed the rule for most apartment communities on their own, set it at you had to earn 2.5 times the rent to qualify. Now it's only 2 times rent. We're not talking net income, we're talking gross income. So what we actually see happen, and what happens is the idea was to allow more people to get into more expensive apartments, right? They also, if they're not careful with their money, they're spending half of their gross income on rent. We regularly see income. I will try to talk people into a cheaper apartment. I will show an apartment and I'll be like, okay, your income is this. That means that you do technically qualify for this one, but I've got this one over here and it's less and you'll be able to save money, and they will choose the more expensive apartment almost every time. And we can't legislate how people choose to spend their money, but it really didn't help a lot of people because now they're at more jeopardy. And what happens on my side of things, I have a higher risk renter that they will default and we will get into a situation we have to evict. I don't want to evict, and it's an expensive project or prospect to do it. It's not fun to move people out of their homes. It is not where any of us want to be. So it put them at risk and it put us more at risk. So also what we would do is we would try to help people out on their credit. Like, okay, your income's good, your credit's not so good, let's help you build it. I have to be more strict now. It's harder for me to give people a chance because they're already spending all of their income, half of their income, their gross income on their rent. So some things like that really, that's caused a lot of hardship.
It's a great example. Katie, how many projects have qualified for the city's rebate program so far?
Oh man, a lot. We're starting to see the attainable housing projects come through our pipeline. Actually, Darcy is one of the developers that I recently just talked to about this. The most common type of project that we're seeing come through is our affordable housing developments. So that's the one that do have the rent restrictions. That's where they do have the rent caps. That's where they're having federal subsidies for lower interest rates to really make up that gaps for the lower income that these apartment developers are receiving in rents. I mean, we rebate hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year back into these projects. But I don't have the number right off the top of my head.
A lot sounds good.
It's a lot.
I'll take
Yeah,
that, a
sorry.
lot. So Thomas, what's the biggest obstacle for builders to meet the increased demands for housing? And how difficult is it to transition from single family housing to move to more multifamily housing?
That's a great question. I think the majority of the builders in town are experimenting with that now. So I'll talk a little bit about mortgage lock, right? So those folks that bought homes over the last few years, right, they're typically in a 3%, 4% interest rate. They bought a nice house. They're happy with it. They've gone through a divorce. They've gone through a job relocation, et cetera, right? What you're seeing with them is they're locked into their home because they're not going to trade a like-for-like home and go from a 4% interest rate to a 7% interest rate. So that traditional single-family home, there's really not a whole lot of demand for it, right? As we've talked about, the demand is on the more affordable, more attainable, lower price point. So I think it's an experiment that we're all going through right now as to what we can do. So I talked a little bit about product, right? You're going to see a more denser product, attached product, new designs on product where the home is built in the house and trucked out to site. You're going to see a lot more of that. As far as what we can do, I think we're learning right now in terms of how do we make that happen. You're going to see more sophistication of manufacturing. You're going to see more innovative product designs and product, right, of swapping out this for something that's better and cheaper and more effective. So I don't really know the answer. I think we're all trying to figure that out. As far as skill set goes, maybe we learn more on some of the commercial apartment builders to build homes, et cetera, if there's efficiency there that can be gained, et cetera. So I don't know, we're figuring it out.
Very good.
Can I
Please.
quantify a lot?
Sure.
As I'm going through, a lot probably means very different things to everyone, as we're talking about a lot of housing units coming up and then a lot of apartments that we are rebating. Honestly, that number is closer to 15, and it feels like a lot in our terms because the number of affordable developments that are coming through our pipeline has really increased, and that is the product type that we're seeing utilize this program the most so far. I think that we will see that increasing as we start to see more money being infused into our community from the Proposition 123 legislation. And so when we talk about successful legislative items for housing, specifically Proposition 123 was a huge success for our community. That wasn't in the last legislative session, but that's something that we voted for a couple years ago.
But could you do more if you got more applications?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And just a huge shout out, Colorado Springs Utilities is an incredible partner on the rebate program, and they do put in a lot of funding to rebate their tap and infrastructure fees.
Outstanding.
I have to say, Colorado Springs, I'll give a shout out to utilities as well, because we've pushed them on some innovative designs and ways that we could restrict tap fees, and they've been open to it and creative with us. So they've actually been a really good partner for us.
Great. Okay, well, kudos to Travis and his team. I got a question. Thank you. That was so sweet. What are the impacts of not having houses transfer to new owners? So I think they mean people staying in their home and us not seeing homes turn over. I would say it can be detrimental because for that homeowner staying there, and as we age in place, you could be living in a 5,000 square foot home and having one or two people. And the Homestead Transferability Act is really important so that older people can take their tax benefit and move to a smaller home. And there's only a benefit up to the first $300,000, but that would be really important that we could have people move out of those bigger homes so more families could move in. And this just creates the cycle. So as young people come in, there's opportunity to fill those homes. What I'm trying to say is we need housing at all income levels. If we want to ensure that we can bring jobs to this community and that we're not just a community for a few, then we have to be sure that we are able to increase the variety of homes. So, and to do that, we do need there to be turnover in those homes. So thank you for that question, but that's the only way we'll be able to grow the economy in this region is by having people move in and at different income levels. So last question, how big is this gap? If all these barriers were removed and innovations implemented tomorrow, how long would it take to catch up and achieve a healthy balance? I'll let all the panel talk about that, and if you have some closing comments.
We have a really big gap. Like I said earlier, it's 16,000 to 27,000 units. I'll leave the timeline to market to Thomas and Darcy, but yeah, like Jill was saying, we would need to start issuing between 6,500 and 8,500 permits per year. Right now, we're seeing an average of 4,600 per year. So there would just really need to be an incredible amount of development activity. I mean, there's an inverse relationship here between the number of single-family home starts and our interest rates. As our interest rates go up, the single-family home market starts to go down, which is why we're seeing also we're seeing more rentals come onto the market as well. So.
Yeah,
Thomas?
I know nationally, I was just at the NAHB, the National Association of Home Builders Conference in Washington, D.C., I believe last week, and I think nationwide the shortage is about over a million homes. So it's not a problem of Colorado Springs. Interest rates affects the entire nation. So the problems that we have here are nationwide problems, and again, it's about a little bit over a million nationwide. So same challenges we have here are nationwide.
Any thoughts, ladies?
So timeline-wise, like if all of a sudden there were all these green lights and I could do anything to make it all happen, I'm still looking at probably 2 to 3 years from when we look at buying a piece of land. And I can't say that usually we go through development review and so forth pretty quickly in the city of Colorado Springs. Other places it's a lot more difficult, as well as through regional building. I mean, it depends on if you're submitting quality plans. Yeah, but we still, a year to plan, a year to do your site development, a year to construct. We got 3 years before we're landing new units on the market, so.
And then
And it
there's
takes
market
a while.
factors with inflation and other things that come up that can delay. Jill?
I will just kind of give a plug for Pikes Peak Housing Network. As Thomas mentioned, this is a nationwide issue. We have a million home deficit, but the founders of Pikes Peak Housing Network, many of them who are in the room tonight, they were really looking at our region and what can we be doing to solve our housing crisis locally. And together, a year or so ago, they created this organization that now I am leading. And this organization that is really focusing on what advocacy around these housing issues is the only organization like it in the entire state of Colorado. There are organizations doing a piece of this work, but this organization has been put here to really focus on the issues that our city's working on and our developers. And I'm just so proud of their work and that they had this, the energy and the fortitude and the vision to create an organization that is really working on these issues locally. And I'm just thankful to all of them who are here tonight. So.
Join me in thanking the panelists. And I thank you for letting me live out my dream to be Barbara Walters. For the young people in the room, I'll explain who that is later. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss such an important issue. And I would just add on the what could happen if we remove these barriers. One bite of the elephant at a time. Let's just keep trying to solve these issues, and it can make a difference when it all adds up at once. I'll turn the panel back over to Noelle.
Thank you, Jonna, and thank you to all of our panelists this evening. We really appreciate the work you guys are doing in our community and your willingness to share your insight on this really important and complex issue. So thank you for being here.